What's up YouTube, it's Australia Duel Masters coming at you with this deck profile today. We've got a deck to review today that we believe that Coca Joe would even be proud of. It's been a while since we've put out a deck profile for you all, and it's something we want to make more of an effort to consciously do, as we've been working on a ton of different decks so far that are quite different to anything else we've ever seen uploaded on YouTube. So we feel like this is worth sharing with you all today, and today the deck we'll be looking at is Phantasmal Horror Gigazald, which is a fun techie deck. It's full of cool combos and heavy discard. What is not to like? This deck profile has come about as it's something we've been playtesting on and off for a few months now. So Lewis initially thought to build a deck surrounding Gigazald, and it was through him letting me play his deck which inspired me to make my own. However, I've made some changes based on personal preferences and fine-tuned it a bit more to my liking. So in essence, this deck is very different to his in a few key areas, but he still gets credit for the deck for the awesome idea. So it's been a work in progress, and it is quite intricate, so I think you all will find it very interesting. The deck itself actually runs 17 shield triggers. Yes, you heard that right, 17 shield triggers. The ratio means it's almost a 1 in 2 chance your opponent will hit a shield trigger. So without any further ado, let's delve into this deck. So we start the deck off with a playset of Melnia the Aqua Shadow, which is a 2-drop multi-civ 1000 powered Slayer, which cannot be blocked. This is quite powerful as it puts your opponent on the clock from the get-go, and they have to find a way to deal with Melnia early. As, you know, the only thing that can really stop it is if you clash it with another creature, but it's basically meaning that your opponent will have to suicide their creature into yours due to Melnia's Slayer ability. And, you know, Melnia gets through things like Bloody Skeeto and so forth, so it really forces your opponent to trade creatures that he or she may not want to trade it with, because Melnia will keep swinging in for shields. And the good thing is Melnia can take down creatures of a higher power value too. So we do rate this card very highly. Next we have the 3 copies of Gigaslug, which is one of the Chimera evolution bait pieces for Gigazald. We like Gigaslug because although it can't attack, it has Slayer ability, meaning it can take out much larger creatures when it blocks. It's a great way to deal with your opponent's higher powered creatures that normally you may struggle to counter and deal with. We then have a playset of Gigabolsa, which is another Chimera evolution bait piece for Gigazole. Gigabolsa is a 4-drop 1000 powered creature that has a shield trigger ability. So when Gigabolsa hits the battle zone, your opponent must discard a card at random from their hand. It's essentially a Chimera version of Locomotiva. When your opponent breaks a shield and hits Gigabolsa, there isn't a sweeter feeling. Next we run 2 copies of GigaRazer, which is a 4-cost 2000 powered Chimera. GigaRazer's effect allows you to return a water or fire creature from your graveyard to your hand. Now obviously we aren't running fire in this build, so we will primarily be using this effect to retrieve our Melnias, Hocuses and Surfers. What's interesting to note is also how much better support for Chimeras got in the later sets of the game before it was discontinued. When Gigazold was first released in set 6, the Chimera support was nowhere near as good as it is now, and it wasn't good enough to build a deck around, in my opinion. Speaking of Gigazold, we are running 3 copies, and this is a key piece in our deck. You may be wondering why we are only running 3 copies. The reason why is we have adequate methods to retrieve Gigazold if it is discarded or destroyed. So running any more than 3 copies for this build is a bit excessive in my opinion. Gigazold is an evolution creature, which means it must evolve onto one of your Chimeras in the battle zone. Gigazold costs 5 mana and has 5000 power. While it isn't the strongest evolution creature, if you can manage to build a wall around it and keep it on the field, your opponent will have a very hard time dealing with the continual discard that comes their way. Gigazold's effect is crazy. It allows you to tap your other darkness creatures, and for each darkness creature you tap, your opponent must discard a card at random from their hand. The power of multiplication. Next, we are running 2 copies of Cranium Clamp. We feel this is sufficient due to the amount of other discard cards we are currently running in the deck. There is no need for more. Cranium Clamp means your opponent must choose 2 cards in their hand and send them to their graveyard. Generally, you'd be wanting to use your clamps in the early game before Gigazald hits the field, as it's much more effective this way. Late game, we feel it's not as good. We then have 2 copies of Zombie Carnival. Now, what we like about Zombie Carnival is that it is a shield trigger, and it means that you can cast it for free if it's broken into. We also like that you get to choose up to 3 creatures to bring back of one race. It means you can recycle your Gigazolds, you can recycle your Chimera pieces, or you can get back your Melnias. Now, I was tempted to run 3 copies, but I feel for the moment 2 is that sweet spot. And I do think that this card edges Morbid Medicine in this build due to its shield trigger ability, and because you get to get 1 more creature back compared to if you were using Morbid Medicine. Also, because this deck primarily runs Chimeras and Liquid People, it's very targeted in what you'll be bringing back, which also maximizes the value of using Zombie Carnival each and every time. You will be retrieving the maximum amount of creatures from your graveyard. We are also running a playset of Terrapit because it's a staple in every single Darkness deck. And what Darkness deck doesn't run Terrapit? I can't think of any. It's essentially more shield trigger goodness, and we have it in the deck as a means to remove our opponent's creatures that may be larger or pose a threat to Gigazald. Next, we are running 2 copies of Miraculous Plague, which I shamefully previously didn't rate that highly in this deck until it won me the game. It's essentially a Terrapit and an Aqua Surfer in 1 card plus the mana burn. So Miraculous Plague allows you to choose 2 of your opponent's creatures in the battle zone. Your opponent must destroy 1 and then send the other one back to his hand. Then you choose 2 of your opponent's cards in their mana zone. 1 goes back to their hand and 1 gets sent to the graveyard. This is powerful as you can target a certain colour of their mana, which will mean they are unable to summon creatures of that colour if they have limited amount of colour in their mana zone. So Plague comes up clutch when you need it to, more often than not from my experience, which again, I didn't rate it highly previously, but after seeing the devastating effect of it and how efficiently it works, I do rate it very highly now. So next, we have the 3 copies of Spiralgate, which is a powerful 2-drop spell card with shield trigger ability. It essentially targets a creature in the battle zone and sends it back to your opponent's hand. It essentially puts your opponent back a turn, which is effective in the early game, and in the late game if you're sending their finishers back to their hand as well. Next, we have a playset of Aqua Hocus. Now, Aqua Hocus is in here purely for draw power and an early body on the board. We're also running a playset of Aqua Surfer for more shield trigger goodness and its creature bounce effect, which can often win you the game in dying moments, as I'm sure we're all aware. Finally, we're running 3 copies of Hydro Hurricane. Hydro Hurricane acts as Aqua Surfer multiplied without the body on the board. As for every darkness creature you have in the battle zone, you may choose one of your opponent's creatures in the battle zone and return it to their hand. If, for example, you have a field full of 4 Chimeras, then you can return up to 4 of your opponent's creatures, clear the field, and swing for game. It's a very key piece in this deck, and it works very nicely. So guys, here's an overview of the deck and how many copies of each card we are running in this build, if you would like to build it yourself. We've now reached the part of the video where we're going to discuss the game plan, And we're going to go through the mechanics of the deck turn by turn and what you would want to be doing with this deck at each stage. Now obviously it's worth noting that things won't always go to plan perfectly due to the unpredictability of card draw and so forth, but this is a guide for what the perfect game plan would look like if you're able to execute it each and every time. So turn 1 is simply charging mana and drawing a card if you are going second. Turn 2 is summoning Melnia or casting Spiralgate to counteract early rush or aggro from your opponent. Turn 3 is summoning Gigaslug or Aqua Hocus for draw power. Turn 4 is casting Cranium Clamp to put pressure on your opponent's hand, or summon Gigabolsa to create board presence along with discard, or summon GigaRazer to retrieve Melnia or Hocus from your graveyard. Turn 5, you're going to want to summon Gigazald and begin heavily discarding your opponent, or casting Zombie Carnival to retrieve key pieces needed from your graveyard. Turn 6, you're going to want to cast Hydro Hurricane to bulk remove your opponent's creatures, or if a single target, you'd more want to summon Aqua Surfer to get the creature bounce effect with the body on the board, or if there's a creature you're permanently wanting to remove, you're going to cast Terrapit. Now turn 7, you're going to cast Miraculous Plague to wreak havoc on your opponent's board and mana. So guys, we'll now review which cards can be used as a substitute if you would like to change anything from the build. These are some suggestions you could consider. So first on the list we have Gigabolva, which is a 4-drop 3000 powered Chimera with the effect that players cannot use the shield trigger abilities from white cards. Now this is a card that Lewis runs in his build, and to be honest, if I was coming up against a light deck, I would definitely be adding this card in at the expense of GigaRazer, as we have Zombie Carnival to retrieve our creatures from the graveyard anyway, and Gigabolva is your best answer to combat Holy Ore, which basically every light deck is running. We then have Gigamatti, which is another 4-drop 3000 powered Chimera whose silent skill effect is you can return a creature from your graveyard to your hand. So if you're wanting another source to access your graveyard with a body on the board, you could consider Gigamatti. Next we have Giga Claws. So Giga Claws is a very brutal card which has a turbo rush effect of whenever this creature attacks, your opponent discards his hand. Now if this is used in conjunction with Upheaval or Hydro Hurricane, things can get very ugly for your opponent very fast. Now speaking of Upheaval, this could be an option to consider for your build, as it is a shield trigger. It costs 6 mana if you're not using it as a shield trigger, and it's a darkness spell where each player puts all of the cards from his mana zone into his hand and all of the cards in his hand into his mana zone tapped. If you manage to have Giga Claws or Lost Soul, your opponent the turn before, then it leaves them with basically no mana, which can be quite brutal. They'll have the hand full of cards that they will not be able to do anything with due to the lack of mana. Now another brutal way to do this play is to return all of your opponent's cards from their mana zone to their hand with Upheaval, and then Lost Soul them or attack with Giga Claws, and they'll lose all of their cards in hand in one cruel hit. It's definitely a really cool combo if you're wanting to pull it off, and it is one of the most satisfying plays you can do in the TCG. That just about covers and wraps up this deck profile. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope you have all found this deck profile interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on the build, and if you have a Gigazold build, feel free to share it in the comments section below as well. As always guys, please remember to like, subscribe and share this video with DM players around the world. We're trying our best to engage with the worldwide community and do our part to contribute to this beautiful game that we all love so dearly. If you've seen this video and you're from Australia, feel free to join our Australia Duel Masters Facebook group as well. Until next time, Duel Masters fans, Australia Duel Masters out. Peace.